In this podcast, I talked to Samir Azadov, who's a senior finance professional leading M&A transactions at a large renewable energy company in England. I could learn from his experience applying programming in his different jobs throughout his career. He started learning Pascal and VBA and MATLAB at university, later picked up Python, and started applying it at his first job after university at UBS, where he was supporting municipal bond traders and the general finance department. He discovered in his work that programming was useful for automation and was able to automate some work so quickly that he made his coworkers a little bit upset because he was performing their tasks more quickly than they could. He later moved to Ireland and worked for Ernst Young's transaction advisory group, where he spent some of his time working for client FP&A groups, developing tools to help them with their reporting. And while doing that, he discovered that programming was useful when working with large data sets that slowed Excel down. Samir and I, in this conversation, talk about Python and programming and its different applications, and I thought it was informative. So if that sounds interesting to you, then you're welcome to join us. So where are you now, and how did you get there?
Yeah, so right now I'm working in M&A team in large renewable energy company, which is focusing on offshore wind investments. I work on mostly sell-side activities and focusing on structured finance.
And when you say sell-side activities, what specifically do you mean?
It would be divestments of the assets or portfolios of renewable energy assets.
Okay.
And probably nowadays I engage less in the coding than before in my main job. But I would say coding helped me to get where I am right now. And it was crucial in beginning of my career, and it was important throughout my different jobs and engagements. But I'm still trying to use it now, and probably today we're going to discuss some of the examples of applicability nowadays as well.
You said that you started programming in college, right?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I back in school in Ukraine, we've had access to Pascal. It was one of the old languages, and probably not the best one, but yeah, I learned Pascal, and I actually did one of the exams by effectively showcasing the test I built in Pascal.
That wasn't your degree though, right? Your degree was in finance?
Yeah, that's true. My degree was in finance. I focused more on mathematical finance, and therefore one of the first touches of Excel VBA was in university, and I was working on basically similar to Black-Scholes valuation through Monte Carlo simulations.
Oh, you're doing that all the way back at university?
Yeah.
That's interesting. So were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that back in university, it was, again, I was like self-learning it, the VBA and how to use VBA in Excel. And I think probably I would do a much better code nowadays compared to what I've done back then. But it was fit for purpose, and effectively was trying to create a new valuation for more exotic call options, like I think it was a chooser call option, and to be able to run Monte Carlo simulation to do evaluation of this call option.
Okay, so you learned a little bit of Pascal at university, taught yourself some VBA, even though you were studying finance. So I assume many people who were studying the same program didn't do that. Why did you choose to learn Pascal and VBA? What interested you in those things, and what did you hope to accomplish by doing that?
It's an interesting question. I think part of me wanted always to be in programming and maybe not necessarily in finance, but then when I realized the amount of manual work you do in finance and Excel, maybe I actually realized it after university, but yeah, it's an interesting question. Just thought that it would be a good addition. I think it was a good guess. back then.
Okay, it was so maybe an intuition that it would be useful.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And
precisely.
when was that you were in university? How long ago?
So actually, just going back, Pascal was early years. That would be 2008,
Okay.
2007. VBA, MATLAB, I've learned in bachelor when I was studying in England, and that would be 2009 to 2012.
Okay, 2009 through 2012. What was it like in England during that time? I was young in the United States during 2009, and obviously there was a big economic problem. Then my parents got stuck with a house for a long time that they couldn't sell for a decent price, and that affected our family significantly. What was it like in London as a university
Well,
student?
was excited. Look, I came from Kiev, from Ukraine. I was like a foreigner there, right? And
Mm-hmm. How was your English?
my English, look, it was tough. I
Yeah.
always had this more mathematical kind of background, and I think for mathematical people, it's harder to learn other languages.
Hmm.
So yeah, that would be one of the issues. But I joined the soccer team, and I think it helped a lot to find friends
Hmm.
at uni by doing these activities.
Yeah, that's interesting. After I left Wells Fargo, well, I had been to Mexico, but we went with people who could speak Spanish. I had been to China, but we went with people who could speak Chinese. And then after I left Wells Fargo, I wanted to unplug for a while because I'd been working so hard for those years. And I went down to South America and did a little tour from Chile to Argentina to Uruguay. And I assumed that the capital of Chile, Santiago, would be tourist friendly. And because it's the capital and apparently I don't know why I had that assumption, but I showed up. I did not speak any Spanish and I could barely get around. And it was tough. I relied a lot on Google Translate. Luckily, I had that. But sometimes I'd need to get food and I'd be practicing what I was going to say to the cashier when I got up to the front of the line. And there's a line of people behind me. And I get up there and I say the order that I rehearsed. And then she would ask me about some option that I didn't plan for. And I'm like fumbling with my words while everybody in line is like, this American who doesn't know Spanish. So it gave me a lot of appreciation for the foreign experience. It was painful. It's hard to get around in a place where you don't speak the language.
Yeah, I
So,
can relate to that. I had experience working in project finance advisory in Spain. It was Catalonia region, close to Barcelona, uh, in Girona, and it was really difficult because the company was Canadian. I was speaking
hmm,
English, and no, not too many people around me were speaking English. They would speak Spanish or French or Catalonian, so
hmm.
it was hard to build relationship.
It seems especially difficult to do technical work. Like, I don't know how, I mean, you just need so much more vocabulary. Like, it's one thing to have a general vocabulary of the Spanish or French or whatever, English, but then to add the technical jargon on top of that seems, well, it's just more language to learn. So you went to England and that was where you started dabbling in VBA. You had
Yeah.
already started learning a little bit of Pascal in Ukraine. And this is in the span of 2008 to 2012. You had an intuition that it was going to be a useful tool. What'd you do after university in England?
I joined a program in England where you get exchanged with American uh, students who finished university and were looking for a first-time job.
Hmm.
So we would go to US for 1 year. They would come to England, and yeah, I was working in UBS Wealth Management America. Was based close to New York in New Jersey,
Okay.
Weehawken,
Yep.
and yeah, was working from there.
Okay. And what was your job specifically for them?
I was more in mid to back office, supporting municipal bond traders and also supporting generally finance department for Wealth Management America.
Mm-hmm. And are you able to talk about how you applied Python while you were there?
Yeah, that was my first direct understanding that actually programming languages help a lot, right? And I realized very quickly that in back office you do lots of manual job. One of the jobs I was given to do was basically doing manual adjustments to a spreadsheet which we received from traders, municipal bond traders, and I needed to convert it by doing exactly the same steps every day to produce a report, which would then fit to one pager, which traders, their managers, our CFO could use to understand how well they performed over last day, last week, or over a month's period. And I quickly realized that building a code, whether it's VBA or Python, would help a lot to save time and actually spend my time on something else, be a bit more creative and think about what I'm actually doing instead of doing this manual job day in, day out. Was basically to create the report. It was taken 3 to 4 hours, depending how proficient you are and how consistent you are in doing it. With the code, it was a matter of minutes to achieve the same outcome.
What was your team's response when you built that and demonstrated it?
I think it was actually an interesting response. My manager was super happy, right? She was into it. She will start thinking, all right, where else can we apply it? And how we can become more efficient. I think the person who was doing this report before me and who saw that what kind of efficiency can be achieved, he wasn't that happy. He didn't probably show it directly. And then when I start looking into where else I can create efficiency, I think general response from the team was not too positive. But I think we need, similar to AI, right? We need to understand that programming will, or machine learning, etc., it will not replace workers, right? It will just change our focus and make us more efficient in the day job.
So in that example, you were able to go from processing report transformations to designing tools to increase efficiency. And well, I guess this is a similar problem that people have faced forever as technology has changed the way that we work. It's not that I've studied this, but I have heard before that when new technology emerges, people often are concerned that it will replace workers. And yet we are fully employed today in 2024 for the most part. Like, we all do have work to do with the tools that we have.
Yeah, I think my manager, even though she was quite happy in the beginning, she very soon understood that I'm the only one capable in adjusting that code. And that would be an issue because I had a term, right? I was serving there for 1 year.
Right.
And I would go back to England after that. And she needed to know who is going to be able to pick it up after me. If there is any changes to the initial data source, there needs to be adjustments to the code. And back then, that would create a significant problem if they basically start looking for people with coding background to join the team.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you built that tool at UBS Wealth Management. You had a term of a year. What'd you do after that year?
After that year, I moved to Spain. So being Ukrainian, it's always difficult to get visa and to find a perfect job exactly where you want. So I basically followed the opportunities, and that opportunity was very interesting. It was basically working for project finance advisory in developing countries, Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe. And basically at that job, I learned more applications of financial modeling, buy side, sell side, so more into investment banking space.
And so you were helping projects to raise capital, and what else?
Yeah. So basically, the typical project would be some infrastructure or farming project where they had new technology applied, but they couldn't get normal commercial banks to support it because it's new technology, it's quite high risk. So they needed to find someone who can help them to find the right financing pockets to support the transaction. Sometimes that would be involving some equity financing of the pilot project and then moving into debt and equity financing of the main facility after.
Okay. How long did you do that for?
2.5 years.
2.5 years. Did you find any opportunity to apply VBA there?
Yeah. So at that stage, I was start learning Python as well and start applying Python.
So that was when you started?
Yeah, it was interesting. I kind of learned it outside of job. I was just trying to understand how you can do algorithmic trading.
Okay.
And that was my application of Python there as well. But yeah, in Excel, I found that VBA is very helpful, and it's standard for the business to have it in financial modeling for at least two things, right? For circularity break, right? So because any financial model which has construction operation stage would have certain circularities caused by interest during construction or by taxes, etc. So it's a simple copy-paste macro. And also the other one would be to support your equity and debt sizing. So based on certain covenants, which is provided to you by commercial lenders or institutional lenders, you would use your model and then use code and goal seek to meet those covenants and to understand what quantum of debt you can raise.
How did using Python for trading go for you back then? What year was this that you were, or what years were you doing this job in Spain?
So it would be 2014 to 2017, and algorithmic trading would be closer to 2017.
Okay.
So it was just basically a platform which I found online called Quantopian. I think it's closed now, where you could basically write a code, learn how to write a code, and then backtest it on the historical movements. And it was quite interesting, but I didn't go too far from there. I never applied it in real life.
Okay. You didn't put your money in it?
No, I didn't invest in it. I think if I spent more time and if I had more time, I would. I think maybe also technology was not that good back then. Maybe right now there is a better universe of stocks you can trade by using algorithms and so on. But yeah, I think my codes were not as good back then, so that's why I didn't invest in it.
I've been hesitant to get to even study algorithmic trading because I don't see the economic benefit. I understand that investing has an economic benefit, so it makes sense that there should be some expected reward. Like if I'm putting my money to work in a company that is doing something useful in the world, then it makes sense that I would get a return on my investment. It's hard for me to distinguish algorithmic trading from gambling. Although maybe the closest thing that I could compare it to would be surfing, because a surfer, goes out into the ocean and they're watching the waves, and a surfer gets a feel, I guess, I've never done it before, but they learn what it looks like when a wave is building, and they paddle their surfboard in just the right place so that they can ride the wave. I think maybe that's what algorithmic traders are doing. Because they're looking at chaos. And they're taking advantage of these tiny little patterns that don't have any obvious meaning to us. It's not like this company hired a great CEO and he's making strategic changes, and so therefore the price of the company is going up. It's like just a market fluctuation that doesn't seem meaningful to the human eye. And they're finding these little patterns and then riding the wave as much as they can without losing too much, without crashing too hard. But other than that, it seems kind of like gambling to me.
I think it's a good comparison. I think probably you can distinguish between intraday traders and algorithmic trading, where you write a code and it trades only if certain rules are met, right? So it's a bit more kind of Probably it's a bit faster than intraday trading. I think the only benefit to the community from it, I totally agree with you, all the valid points. I think the only benefit would be that it creates enough liquidity in the market. So when the normal trade, or even us just coming in to trade the normal stock, there is liquidity constantly there.
Somebody to take the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't heard anybody give me a persuasive argument for why I should get into that, so I'm still holding back. So you worked in Spain in project finance advisory, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're helping projects that are applying new technology to find capital when it's difficult for them to find it through standard means. You applied some VBA, you started messing around with Python related to algorithmic trading, didn't go too far with that. What happened after that?
After that, I moved to Ireland to join Ernst Young, EY. So Big Four, I was part of the transaction advisory department, focusing more on modeling and valuation.
And you said that you were assigned to work for different clients and you would help them to develop reports during this time?
Correct. So you would have different types of engagements. Some of the engagements you would basically sit with the team and work from EY office. And then you would have engagements where you basically become a secondee, where they send you to the client, like it's a secondment, effectively, to your client. So you become like effectively a client employee for a short period of time. You always come to their office, and that would be in my experience, that most of the departments were FP&A, and effectively I would come in and build a model which would help them produce the reports on weekly, monthly, quarterly basis.
And is that what you did most of the time when you were there?
No, I would say maybe 50% of the time. Otherwise, I would build, again, financial models to support fundraising processes or project finance processes, helping renewable energy funds and real estate developers.
Okay. And where was your greatest opportunity to apply programming there?
There actually were a few applications. First of all, for FP&A clients, right? They would be large data sources where you basically needed to then consolidate it into accounts to create this actual and forecast for the next 12 months in terms of like financials, financial statements, P&L, cash flow, balance sheet, and so on. And to use only Excel in it was quite difficult because those data would be quite significant, quite large. And to create a report which has like accounts and the timeline, you would need to use either VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP now, or combination of index match and so on, and lots of them, because there are lots of accounts, lots of different entities the business might have, and so on. And as a result, the Excel spreadsheet would become really heavy and really slow in operation. So I found that applying the some sort of coding would actually help. It create a bit of black box in a sense, right? It will do exactly the same exercise,
similar to the problem at UBS, right?
Yeah, that's it. So you basically create a bit of problem, a bit of black box, but you can resolve it by introducing some checks, right? So while no one sees what happens, or it's hard to trace how did you get to the end result, you still have a source data, and you can double check if totals matching, if totals for specific entity matching. So you can apply VBA, or Python, you can create black box, but just you need to introduce some sort of checks to make sure it works.
So that the people who are have an interest in the outcome being correct can verify that it was calculated appropriately.
Yeah, yeah, and the spreadsheet would become many times lighter and would be easier to operate with it, used for some additional analysis, etc.
So did you accomplish that with VBA?
Yeah, I accomplished it with VBA, but I started testing Python when I was at EY and trying to understand it, in what cases I can actually use Python to save more time. Because generally, during that time, I have that knowledge that Python should operate faster, right?
Faster than VBA?
Than faster than VBA, right? But it would be important to find kind of applications where you can make it faster, because VBA itself as a language is very dependent on Excel functionality, right? If you do a goal seek, you do it within Excel environment, right? You don't they don't have separation from Excel or doing any calculations kind of outside of Excel in a sense.
I can transition that into Google Sheets.
Yeah, but with Python, right? If you can somehow segregate some parts of calculation, that calculation will become faster because it now doesn't depend on Excel, speed of Excel running that calc, and that's where the key saving is going to come.
So are you saying that when you write code in VBA, executing that code processes the same calculations more slowly as executing the same calculations in Python because the VBA code depends on the, what is it, like underlying Excel? What is it? Do you know?
Yeah, so basically, like in VBA, right? If you do, let's say, if there is a small calc in the Excel, right? You can use VBA to, let's say, do a multiplication function, right? It will use the Excel data, and then you can populate it in Excel, and then it effectively going to recalculate within Excel. Therefore, it doesn't do steps outside of Excel. It keeps reusing Excel, right? But if you can isolate that piece and build it in Python outside of Excel and just use Excel as an input data and an output, right? You can then save significant time.
Okay. So you started experimenting with that at EY. Did you apply it in any work projects? Or were you just experimenting?
I was mostly experimenting. My problem was that if I do everything in Python and I'll do it and deliver it to the client didn't know Python, so that would be a problem. They wouldn't be able to reuse it later on.
Like at UBS.
Like at UBS.
Except it's Python now instead of VBA.
Yeah, exactly. Because VBA...
Were they comfortable with you writing things in VBA there?
They would ask me to limit it, but they would be familiar with VBA, right? So VBA, and when you do the project finance, right? If you're raising some debt, the lenders are typically asking you to make sure that this model is going to be reviewed by a third party, and whoever is reviewing it's typically Big Four or other accounting kind of audit company. They would typically need to have a knowledge of all the codes you're going to apply in that project finance model. And they typically have a knowledge of VBA, right? So that becomes kind of a problem, right? And in a sense, it would be easier to implement Python if all the stakeholders will start using it, whether it's a client, investment bank who's building a model for you, or auditor.
So what did you do after EY?
After EY, after 2 years in EY, I moved to renewable energy space. So I joined an Irish developer called Mainstream and worked for them for 3 years. And I think my experience generally was very similar. I think the interesting bit is I started applying in EY was Power BI. So instead of using PowerPoint as your deliverable, you could deliver it in Power BI form, where you can do the same static slides if you want, similar to PowerPoint. But in Power BI, you can also have dynamic slides where You basically, let's say you have a portfolio, you click on one asset and have financials related to that asset, then you again start looking at overall portfolio. So it was a very dynamic kind of presentation form. But the problem I faced was that I operate mostly with financial models, and to upload financial model to Power BI tool, there was no, at least back then, there was no clear cleansing kind of functionality in Power BI to adopt the two-dimensional model, because it needed, as a data source, it needed a one-dimensional column-based kind of data. And that's where I used coding, and that's where I tried to use Python more back in the UI, effectively converting the data into Excel. But to be honest, again, because there was no isolation of processes, I don't think Python created significant kind of saving in time when compared to VBA, but I think it was operating slightly faster.
Okay, so you're saying you could have accomplished the same thing using VBA, but you chose to use Python?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and maybe it was a little bit faster, but not significantly, not meaningfully faster.
Not meaningfully faster, and also because I didn't need to deliver that code to anyone. I just used it myself to create the data, and I was delivering the Power BI in the end, right? So I didn't need to kind of share that step. And that black box, I could keep it on my computer, basically.
Yeah. Okay. And how have you applied coding since then? What kinds of problems have you addressed, and how have they gone?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. At mainstream, I probably didn't apply it that much in a unique sense, right? I was still doing the same. Circularity breaks, goal seeks for that, and so on, and conversion to Power BI. I think the other one was trying to consolidate the multiple investments we had globally and used coding for that. But I think the interesting case would be, and again, I can't really talk about diving too much into detail, but using Monte Carlo simulation to do evaluation of either a call option or real call option. By real call option, I mean some real life situation when you're basically considering multiple decision making, like whether you continue operating wind asset or close it, and or interrupt it for a certain time, and how that affects kind of the NPV or value of the project.
And that's been useful.
Yeah, definitely. Python helped a lot as well. I actually heard about people using Python more in my current company, Ørsted, which is a Danish semi-state company focusing on offshore wind. And some people even trying to rebuild the entire financial model in Python, which takes a long time to do it. But once it's done, it just creates so much time saving when you're trying to either do Monte Carlo simulation with that model or just running simpler analysis.
Is that unique, people in Ørsted learning Python, or do you think that's indicative of a more general pattern? Because in the past, Python was not used for tasks like that.
I think people who into coding, they know that Python is ultimate language, right? And probably the language which can deliver the most efficient result and can be applicable in so many different ways, right? But yeah, I hope it's not unique, right? I think it's obviously our companies, almost 10,000 people, and probably one team of 5 are using Python, right? But I think more and more quantitative analysts are going to use it across the companies, and it will become more common.
It'll be interesting to see. I think of JP Morgan campaigning to educate their finance professionals to learn Python. They're unique in that way. Gil and I have been studying job posting data, gathering and studying job posting data, and we found that close to 25% of JP Morgan's finance jobs that they've posted either require or prefer candidates to know Python. There's no other number like that in banking. They're by far the highest. But others still have high numbers. I think Capital One is 10%, more than 5 in 10,000. Then there are investment managers like AQR, for example. 80% of their finance jobs require preferred candidates to know Python. So I haven't been asking this question for a long time. We've just started looking into it. I started learning Python back in probably 2017, maybe 2018 that I started learning. So I haven't witnessed the changes as long as you have, but it does seem to me, well, I know that JP Morgan's investment in Python is unprecedented in the finance industry. And so I wonder if that will cause more general adoption of Python as a tool. We have heard our students saying that they've signed up for Python classes because they've seen job postings that mention Python. They'll say, I'm looking for a job. Many of the postings require or prefer Python, and so I want to learn it so I can be more competitive. So if companies are requiring it, then candidates will start to learn it. And the more people learn it and are hired into these companies, the less somebody who can code in Python will run into the problem that you ran into at UBS and at EY, where you're capable of creating a useful tool, but the people around you aren't capable of auditing it and modifying it.
Yeah. And to be honest, I think for me so far, if it's third-party facing tool, I would prefer using VBA.
Because of its familiarity?
Exactly, because everyone can review my work and understand what I've done and can adjust it. While if I'm doing analysis by myself and I don't need to share, I would definitely prefer Python.
Why is that?
I think, again, just more, it creates efficiency, right? I think the fact that it's less dependent on Excel itself and on functionality of Excel is important. And also just generally VBA, I think Microsoft, it's one of those tools in Microsoft Office, which Microsoft didn't invest enough over a significant amount of time. I don't want to be wrong in this conversation, but I think there was a period of 10 years when there was zero investment in VBA or zero development in VBA.
I wonder if we could look it up. I could search real quick.
And basically, whether it's just interface or debugging functionality and so on in VBA is not as developed as in Python. Yeah, I just used Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, and was suggesting that Microsoft has continued support of VBA, but there hasn't been any significant or major new investment in VBA recently. Yeah, I was saying that there was a rumor in the market that does the fact that Microsoft doesn't pay too much attention to VBA, does it mean that it's going to be disabled in the newer versions, right? There was this perception that if there is no update, nothing changes in VBA. Does Microsoft understand whether it's important for people or not? Because I think maybe 98% of people don't use VBA, right, in Excel.
Excel users.
Yeah.
I would imagine that they wouldn't deactivate it because people are creating tools. People have been creating tools in VBA for a long time, and they wouldn't want to break those spreadsheets. But it is interesting that Microsoft has decided to integrate Python into Excel. I haven't messed with that much. It doesn't seem like a great development environment to me. But it is significant that they're deciding to do that. especially since it sounds like Python is able to do many things that VBA can also do with packages like pandas and NumPy and the different packages that allow you to manipulate Excel. But there are a lot of things that Python can do that VBA can't. So putting those two languages in the same environment seems to favor Python.
Yeah, and especially if you're working with large data set, which exceeds capacity for Excel, you can always use Python as a starting tool before the data is clean enough to start using it in Excel.
Well, interesting. Do you have any other thoughts? We're trying to understand what the place of Python is in the finance industry, whether or not any finance professional should actually learn it. And we can go, if you do have any thoughts, we can explore them. It's not necessary for us to use 100% of this conversation. So you don't need to feel like you need to put on a show or create content of any certain type. What else do you think about this?
Probably the other thing is development of AI, right? Whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, or Copilot, especially Copilot in terms of like when you use it in Excel. I didn't play a lot with that yet, but generally I think AI creates opportunity for people to learn programming, learn Python.
Why do you say so?
You basically, if you know what you want to achieve, you can basically make a prompt in one of those tools, and they're great in populating the code. And then you start understanding, all right, it doesn't deliver exactly what I wanted. What do I need to change to get there? I don't think it's perfect place to learn your first language, but once you have a knowledge of one language and you understand the general principle of how the code's working, learning a new language through AI becomes easier.
Okay. So it's learning that or writing code in a new language is more accessible using AI, Copilot, Gemini, or ChatGPT or whatever, because I can write a prompt and it'll give me some code, but it's still necessary for me to know the language because the code that the model delivers isn't going to be perfect. If I already know another language, I have an idea of the components that should be there. Maybe I don't understand the syntax perfectly, but seeing examples generated by AI might help me to become familiar with that, even if I'm checking it for errors or maybe making small modifications by looking something up on Stack Overflow that the AI doesn't explain perfectly well.
That's it. And with Stack Overflow, right, you probably spend a bit more time to find exactly what you need, right? While if you know how to prompt it and you know the question, you can quickly get the answer from AI. And also, even like you said, if you have knowledge of the other code, you can just take that code and say, this is a VBA code. Can you convert it into Python? And try to operate it from Python environment from there.
Yeah.
And start learning from that whole step. So I think in future, Python will be more accessible for a finance industry because of the development of AI.
It's an interesting thought. And I imagine Risk would want people to know Python if they are using AI to generate code rather than relying on AI to get it right the first time.
Yeah, that's a typical problem accountants facing, right? Whether you prepare a ledger using pen and paper or you're using software, right? Once you start using software, you probably understand the accounting less than by learning it using pen and paper.
Yeah. I think that will be an interesting general problem as we figure out what to do with these LLMs, because this software doesn't only... Well, imagine you're a high school student and you're in an English literature class and your teacher asks you to write an essay on a Shakespeare play, Othello. You could ask ChatGPT to do that for you, but you're not thinking about Othello. Like, you can look over what it says, but you're not learning what you're supposed to learn. You're not learning how to read a play and understand what's significant about it and form an opinion about it. And in fact, it seems like the people who are producing these LLMs are suggesting that we use it to read and summarize things. Like they're suggesting that that's one of the best applications. Like have this LLM read your emails and summarize it. So then it's like, if I can have the LLM read my email and if I can have it write one for me, then who's having the conversation?
No, for sure. Like with any tools, there needs to be a right application for it. And I think in terms of the coding, it makes it more accessible for people who either never coded before or want to transition.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. That's all I have for you today, Samir. Thanks for jumping on. Anything else before we go?
No, thanks for having me, Zach. And hopefully, if we have similar conversation in a few years' time, there's more application of Python and code generally in finance industry.
We'll see. It'll be interesting. Thanks for joining us for this podcast. If you liked it, please hit the like button below. And if you want to see more, then subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.